Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name's Cameron, and today we've got a very special review here on the channel. In today's video, I'm gonna be taking a look at two of this year's most coveted limited releases, both of which are coming from Legacy Kentucky distilleries. Starting on the left here, we have the Old Forester Birthday Bourbon 2024, and on the right, we have the Four Roses 2024 Small Batch Limited Edition. Both of these are coming in with similar price points and also similar proof points. A little bit different on the ages. We're gonna go through the stats of each of these whiskeys as we move through these reviews one by one, starting with the Old Forester and then finishing up with the Four Roses. But before we go any further, this review would not be possible without the incredible generosity of two friends of the channel. And both of these guys have very similar first names. So Dustin with a D, thank you for the Old Forester sample, and Justin with a J, thank you for the Four Roses sample. So this is gonna be a little bit of a different video, guys. I don't typically pair reviews like this, but to me, this kind of makes sense because the Birthday Bourbon and the Four Roses LEs are bottles that I typically don't get to taste each and every year. And in the case of the Old Forester, I think I've only tasted like maybe one or two Birthday Bourbons going all the way back to 2012. I've tasted the 2012 and maybe I've had the 19 or the 20. So I don't really have like a frame of reference for the Birthday Bourbons. And I think in some ways that's gonna be a good thing for this video because I'm coming in really fresh. And then with the Four Roses, I've tasted a few more of these LEs, but I don't nerd out about them so much. The last one that I really dug into was the 2021. So pretty fresh on both of these. Take everything I say today for, if it's helpful, for what you will. If you hate it, let me know in the comment section below. Let me know if you've tried either of these whiskeys and what you think about them. But let's get into this review now. Again, starting with the Old Forester. This is coming in around 200 bucks if you find it at SRP. Secondary is way higher than that. I wanna say $700-800 range for these when they first hit the market. 12-year age statement on this, which is fantastic, and a 107 proof point, which I know that a lot of the Birthday Bourbon diehard fans are happy about this proof point because the proofs on these do fluctuate year to year, as do the ages. Great stats. Let's go in now on the nose and see what we get here. Wow, so this is a very saturated feeling nose for a bourbon. It's all fruit forward, fruit driven. Again, like reduction type fruit notes, compote, saturated stewed. Those are all the kind of words that come to mind. Blueberries, grapes, dark cherry notes, plums. We're really in that purple and black fruit range, maybe even like some blackberry or something. The nose on this first impression is like, wow, this feels like a special whiskey. It has this kind of softness to it as well on the nose, which is something that you get with higher age statements, especially from these Legacy Kentucky distilleries. They develop this kind of gentle, elegant, elevated profile. Those are some of the words I think I want to use. First impression, this smells really wonderful. Let's go back into the nose for a little bit more here. Yeah, so in addition to all of those fruit forward notes, you do get a really nice chocolate quality kind of at the base of this whiskey, kind of a supporting note for everything. And this is something that I picked up on the Old Forester 1924 actually. So that had a really nice chocolate note as well. This whiskey is definitely more refined than the 1924. I know people might want to draw comparisons and say, hey, maybe you can save many hundreds of dollars by buying the 1924. Yeah, I mean, that is the case, but just before this video, I actually compared this Birthday Bourbon to the 1924. It's not close. This really is head and shoulders above it. So on the nose, again, this feels very special. We get that chocolate note. The only complaint from me on this whiskey is gonna be kind of this top note. And I have this complaint on so many Brown-Forman products. I know I sound like a broken record, so I apologize if you guys have heard this from me before on the channel. This isn't a banana note on this Old Forester, which I'm happy about because that feels really, youthful. But it does have that yeast note that Old Forester products get. You get this all the way down to the 86 proof shelfer. That's a $20, $25 whiskey or something like that. That's a note that I want to see age out of this whiskey at 12 years old, 200 bucks, probably way more if you find it in a store marked up or secondary or auctions or whatever. I don't want to have that yeast note in here. It just makes the whiskey feel a little cheaper, a little younger. Now it does coincide a little bit with a vanilla cream note, and that vanilla cream, on the other hand, is one of my favorite aged whiskey notes. While I do get the yeast, and I don't like that, it mingles with the vanilla cream. It makes me forgive it just a little bit. So overall, fantastic nose on this Birthday Bourbon. Let's go to the palate now. Cheers. Wow, this is a glorious whiskey on the palate. There might be a few small complaints along the way, but the first moment that this hits your tongue, you can tell it's gonna be a really special whiskey. It starts off with all of those fruit-forward notes that I talked about on the nose, but the palate actually kind of kicks off with a sour and tart fruit sensation. You do get the sweetness, but I think the very first thing is that it feels like this just totally grips your palate, and you get all of those blueberry notes and those grape notes. Because the sip starts off with that kind of tangy sour character, it immediately gets your mouth watering, and it kind of sets up your palate for the rest of the experience. Now, as it develops on the palate and it kind of rolls back, it sweetens up so much. It introduces the vanilla cream on the mid palate. The fruit notes turn a little bit sweeter and they move away from that sour tart quality. And now as we move into the finish, it's a really nice finish. It's a little bit dry, a little bit tannic, but I actually don't mind. I don't mind that tannic quality to this whiskey because it's not often that you get to taste Old Forester at this age. You know, it is a little dry, but I'm gonna take that. I think that's fine. I think it also kind of relates back to those more sour gripping fruit notes. You expect, you know, after the front of the palate feeling that way, that in the finish you might be left with a little bit of a drier sensation, a little bit more tannic, tannic feel. So great first sip. I mean, this is top tier whiskey in my mind. Yes, a little hint of that yeast in there as well on the palate. Don't love that, as you guys know. Let's do one more sip, then we're gonna go to the Four Roses here. Good Lord. I'm telling you what, this is so good. And maybe this is just because I am new to birthday bourbon, you know, kind of generally speaking. I don't know. You guys have to let me know in the comments section if you're a birthday bourbon enthusiast and you have these every year and you've tried this 2024. I would be so curious to know how this stacks up against some of the previous years. But to me, even though on the mid palate, I'm starting to get even more of that yeast note appearing, but also I'm getting a little more chocolate too. So you take the good with the bad. Even with that said, I think this drinks like a special whiskey. It has, again, that subtlety, that kind of complexity, and that elegant and subtle and just soft mouthfeel. It's kind of velvety on the palate. So I love this stuff. I would absolutely recommend this at the SRP of $200. I would probably pay up to $300, maybe $350 at most for this whiskey. I know that sounds extreme. I know a lot of folks don't like it when people on YouTube, you know, making reviews like this speculate on what I would pay, you know, what's the most I would pay for this whiskey. I know that might rub some people the wrong way, but it's the reality for a lot of us. Like, we're not gonna find this at SRP. I also don't wanna pay full secondary for it. So what's the most I would pay? $300, maybe up to $350. If you find this at SRP, you should buy 2 or 3 of them. Like, if you're given that option by some miracle of God, absolutely be picking up a couple of these. That is gonna do it for the birthday bourbon. Thank you, Dustin, for letting me taste that. That is really cool. So now we're gonna move on to the Four Roses. This is coming in at 108.2 proof, so just a little bit higher than the birthday bourbon. That's 54.1% ABV. Now the ages on this Four Roses, we have a blend of 12, 15, 16, and 20-year bourbons. But the majority of the blend is actually 15, 16, and 20, with the minority portion of the blend being that 12-year bourbon. Price on this, also $200. Secondary on the Four Roses is typically a little bit less, I would say, than the birthday bourbon. You usually see these between $400 and $500. That's kind of like the full secondary markup. So with that said, let's go to the nose on the Four Roses and see, you know, is it at the level of the birthday bourbon? Does it kind of stand on its own? Let's find out. All right, so the Four Roses brings me back to a little bit more of a classic Kentucky bourbon profile. We're definitely now more in the realm of your caramels, of your kind of traditional baking spice, cinnamon type notes. Great oak presence on this. I've got to call that out like right away. It feels special on the nose, just considering how the oak is so well integrated. It's the backbone of the whiskey, but it's, again, kind of like the birthday bourbon. It has that elegance and that elevated experience on the nose where it feels soft and inviting. And I think maybe that has to do also with the proof of both of these whiskeys. I mean, 107 for the Old Forester and 108.2. These aren't rip your face off kinds of proofs for bourbons. And personally, I mean, I like the 115 to 125 range. These do feel a little bit reserved for me on the nose personally, but I also understand that these limited editions need to appeal to a wide audience of drinkers. And I think they're going for these kind of mid-range proof points. It does make sense. This does have that kind of, again, that soft feeling on the nose, a little bit more of that classic profile, but there also are some really unique elements to the nose of this Four Roses. Yeah, I would say one of those is kind of like this clove note. So I get a lot of very fragrant spices coming out of the Four Roses. It's got a potpourri kind of sensation to it. Again, I mentioned clove. Very much a Thanksgiving and Christmas time kind of whiskey. I would say it's spice driven on the nose, and that makes sense. We're talking Four Roses. They're kind of known for having these spicier whiskeys. You do get great kind of, herbal touches in this whiskey. Just a little bit of an herbal thing, a little bit of a floral thing. Not overdone in either of those categories. Generally speaking though, it's spice driven, it's oak driven, very classic down the middle profile, good vanillas. On the fruit side, I would say that this is like a sweet orange citrus, very classic, I'm gonna keep saying classic, very classic cherry notes, and also maybe a little bit of like an apricot thing in here. So good nose. I think it feels special. I'm curious to see what the palate's like. So here we go, cheers. So this is an interesting one, and I think already you can probably tell I'm a little questioning about this. I'm not totally blown away. The front of the palate is ridiculous. So good. The entry onto the palate is like just the perfect balance of spice, floral, herbal, Four Roses, like just quintessential Four Roses character with that elevated oak experience. And when you have these older Four Roses products, the oak notes differ, let's say from the birthday bourbon. The birthday bourbon has this kind of fruit forward thing going on. The oak is like this sweet, fruity, semi-tannic thing in the background. With the Four Roses, it's almost a creamy oak. So like there's this buttercream base to the whiskey almost that feels like it's coming from the high age statement. And so I like the front of the palate on this. As it starts to develop though, the spice takes over and the body of the whiskey kind of drops out, like the floor drops out. And once you get into the finish, it is a long, spicy finish, but it's not a flavorful finish. Like the flavor kind of dies off in the mid palate, and then the finish is just spice. Listen, if I'm paying $200 for a whiskey, and I know that at Four Roses, they're really taking a lot of care in blending these LEs, so they have a lot of control. I mean, they're presumably nerding out, making tons and tons of blends and trying them and seeing which one's best. If you have that much control over your product, I think you have to really ensure that you're firing on all cylinders, all parts of the experience of the whiskey. I don't think you can afford to lose nose, palate, or finish on these at the price point. And this, unfortunately for me, loses the flavor and the body of the whiskey on the finish in favor of just a churning spice, which I like. And it is a lengthy finish with regards to the spice, but not with the flavors. And the flavors are so freaking good that you just want to experience them for a little bit longer. I'm gonna do one more sip of this, see if it changes a little, if it stays consistent, maybe the finish is improved. Let's do this one more time, cheers. Yeah, this unfortunately just falls off a little too fast for me. I think the second sip is better. As you continue drinking this whiskey, it does kind of build on itself sip after sip. That is a good thing. The front of the palate integrates a little bit more. I'm acclimated to those very fragrant, intense aromatic spices like clove, like those potpourri notes. And the front of the palate now feels a little more fruit driven actually, which is nice and a little bit reminiscent of the Old Forester. But in this case, the fruit notes are a bit lighter. As we get to the finish here, it kind of loses itself. Great spice hanging on. But for me, this is a tough one. I think, $200 is a lot of money for a whiskey. And I think in today's market, we are seeing the prices continue to go up. I personally would still pick this up if I found it at SRP, and I would not pay $1 over that because I think this is very good whiskey. And it's in some ways crushable because the finish falls off so fast, but I do selfishly want to experience these flavors, right? Like you don't get these flavors in any other Four Roses release. The single barrels are great. And most of the time I actually prefer these to the LEs because they are, as you would expect, a more singular, down the middle, direct profile, and they're higher proof. And so that's why I tend to prefer these over the LEs. I don't find this flavor profile in a lot of the single barrels, unless you're talking about some of the really high age, like 16 to 20 year things that they've put out over the last couple of years. But those are tough to find. And so I would pick this up at SRP. I would not pay over it. I think secondary on this at $400 to $500, no freaking way. I wish they would have put the finish together a little bit better on this one, but it's still delicious whiskey. And Four Roses at this age and Old Forester at this age, both of those are just treats and so fun to sip on. So thanks guys, Dustin and Justin, for sending these my way. I think I prefer the birthday bourbon this year over the Four Roses, but you know, be curious to see what you guys say in the comments below. Like, comment, subscribe. Cheers, and I'll see you guys soon here on Drums and Drams.